Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma O'Dooher and Tom Breeze. Episode 12, A Whole School Behaviour Policy with Kelly Bubbins.
Welcome back, everyone, to Emma and Tom Talk Teaching. We have a guest in the podcast studio, a guest who is also a colleague within the Cardiff Partnership, who works with us closely regarding student teachers. They are from a school all the way from just down the road, actually, from Willows High School. We have Deputy Head Kelly Bubbins with us. How are you doing, Kelly?
Fine, thank you.
Warm welcome to you. And we're here to talk about something that actually is worth celebrating because you've just had, hot off the press, your Estyn inspection report. It's just come through and there are some... we genuinely asked you to come on this podcast before this was published.
Promise, yeah.
We had a hunch that Willows is doing something really well. In fact, they probably do multiple things that make the sort of culture, the environment for learning around the school, in classrooms, really conducive to engagement. And we really wanted to get under the skin of this, you know, how this works, how it's happened. But I think it's probably worth quoting from the Estyn report here, just to give a flavour to the listeners of you know, what they saw when they came out to you. Mm. So it says clear classroom routines, highly effective relationships between pupils and staff, and high expectations of pupils' behaviour and engagement in lessons are notable strengths of Willows High School. Most pupils behave exceptionally well in lessons and around the school and have positive attitudes towards learning. They settle quickly to their work and maintain their concentration. This helps pupils, including those with additional learning needs and those eligible for free school meals, to make secure progress in their learning. So I guess before we sort of dig into that and what kind of magic is going on there, you should probably tell our listeners just a little bit about the school. Where is Willows High School? What's a bit about the context, if you could?
Okay. So Willows is in between Splot and Tremorfa, and if you look at traditional kind of descriptions of areas, we are the second most socio-economically deprived area of Wales. There are a lot of children live in sort of poorer housing. We are one of the main areas that receive asylum seekers and refugees to the city. So always we're described as kind of traditionally disadvantaged, and I always start any speech or any talk by saying, however, we don't see ourselves as disadvantaged. We see our school as having children with lots of different skills, lots of different languages, lots of different experiences that they bring to the school. They're some of the most resilient children that you would meet. But traditionally, I suppose in the past, it was a school that was considered maybe failing. It was considered a school that was sort of like in need of help. But I suppose that people that actually came through the doors didn't get that impression. But to try and change people's impression of it was difficult.
I suppose because we have listeners all over the place, even international ones, just to kind of paint a bit of a picture for the listeners. And like you say, it's so easy for this to sound sort of disrespectful when it's not, because I've walked through the door at Willows, mm-hmm. and you know, you get this lovely warm vibe off the pupils. You know, they're actually really friendly, and it's really nice. But if you were to land in Cardiff, having never been to Cardiff before, you might come to Cardiff Met, which sits in quite a leafy suburb, or it sort of straddles a really posh leafy suburb and kind of mm-hmm. an ex-council estate, but you know, reasonably sort of well-to-do parts of Cardiff. You would drive, what would it be, 2 miles, 3 miles down the road?
Not far at all.
And just what you see is such a contrast. I mean, you have a sort of enormous factory, don't you, that overlooks the school, sort of steel.
Yeah, so we're in the shadow of the steel works. We have a traveller site next door to the school, which some of our pupils come from. We have lots of like hostels, and some pupils obviously that maybe asylum seekers or refugees come from the hotels in Cardiff as well. So very often there's some families with maybe 7 children living in one hotel room. So especially since COVID, you know, things haven't been easy for the pupils that come through our doors, and they are from all different walks of life.
Yeah, and it's a sort of part of Cardiff, I guess some people maybe almost don't even know is there, because it's sort of tucked away. There's a big kind of bypass road, lots of factories and that sort of thing. But hidden in amongst it is this school.
That's right. And I think very often people will arrive at the school and they'll say, oh, we didn't even realise there was a school at the end of this lane. We didn't know, that there was one in this area. It's built on the old airfield. So it is, I suppose, purposely on the very edge of the city. But yeah, so it's been a big change over recent years.
So perhaps, would I be accurate in my understanding that the school has been on approximately about a 10-year journey from sort of around about 2015 when your new head teacher came in?
Yeah, that's right. So we're lucky in a way. So myself, the head teacher, and a couple of other members of the senior leadership team have been at the school quite a long time. So I've been there for 23 years. So we've seen obviously this difference and this change. And when we sort of rose to the top, became in charge, we were like, okay, what are we going to do to make a difference? So, there's been some brilliant initiatives even in that 20 years before, but it was just trying to make a kind of put our stamp on it, make a final stance and say, this is how we're going to change the perception of the school.
And is there any way that you could sort of paint a picture for us of, when you sat down at that table to go, right, what kind of change are we going to make? What were the overriding issues that you wanted to change? You talked about, wanted to change that sort of reputation,
yeah.
but how would you sort of characterise the learning environment then? And, what were you looking to, or where were you looking to help you decide how to change?
So it was around the same time that sort of research was becoming at more at the forefront of education. And I think we were one of the first schools that thought, right, we're actually going to use research and get to grips with this. The head teacher and the other deputy head teacher are both mathematicians, and I think they're very scientific. So they were like, okay, we're going to go down the research path. So Chris, who's the head teacher, has got right next to his door the quote from Grace Hopper saying the greatest thing, in the English language, the greatest danger is that we've always done it this way. And he's like, if we're going to do it in a different way, we're going to do it the Willows way, we're going to just go and get all the best research from up and down the country, bring it all together, and then try and fit it to our context.
I thought you were going to say it's better to ask forgiveness than...
Well...
that's not really a head teacher-y sort of quote.
No. Yeah, so what we did is we went all around the country, to be honest with you. So we went to Torquay Academy, we went to Great Yarmouth, we went to King's Warrington, we went to Greenshaw Trust Schools, and we went, most notably probably to Michaela in London. We were probably the first school, or one of the first schools that were allowed to visit Michaela. Wow. And, don't get me wrong, it isn't something that you can copy every single thing from, but we took quite a lot from that school as well as the other schools, sat around the table, brought it all together and said, right, what is going to work? What can we change? How can we change perceptions using all these different bits of research? We were really inspired by, so Michaela often quotes the Matthew effect. So they're saying, the rich are going to get richer, the poor are going to get poorer, unless you put some kind of intervention in. And the same with, behaviour, same with knowledge. They're character rich, they're network rich, they're knowledge rich. So we kind of went down that track and thought, right, we're going to bring in anything that can counteract that to try and give our pupils all these extra skills that they need in life. So on my office wall, I've got the Thomas Sowell quote, which is, if you want to see the poor remain poor generation after generation, just keep the standards low in their schools and make excuses for their academic shortcomings and personal misbehaviour. But please don't congratulate yourself on your compassion. And I think that is what people were doing before. They were saying, oh, well, the poor kids or the poor, all of them, they've come from this bad background. And what we all decided to do was, no, we're not going to make excuses. Obviously we put a lot of pastoral work in place, but we're not going to make excuses. It's going to be that we want these children to achieve the highest standards and have high expectations for them at all times.
So did you get a sense then that the pupils themselves were, because pupils are, very perceptive, aren't they? They pick this stuff up. Were they getting the vibe from the not the way the school looked at them, but the way the community perhaps, or people outside the community looked at them? They were thinking, well, we have no chances. We're, here's where we are. Here's where we're going to stay.
So true, and it's sort of generational. So lots of the parents of our children came to our school, and they'd kind of passed down, well, oh, you just come to Willows. Oh, what's the point? It's just Willows. Things like, we know it's a rubbish school, miss, or why are you asking us to do this? It's Willows. It was that kind of comments always in the background. Not every child, obviously, but, in the background. And other people in the community across Cardiff as well, the press. It was that kind of attitude. And we thought, no, why do these children deserve that reputation? And we need to get the children on board to say, well, no, this is us. We're going to go against this reputation and we're all going to do it together. So
it's framed around aspiration rather than behaviour, because when people talk about Willows, they often kind of go, oh, they got their behaviour management sorted.
Yeah.
So you set out, because we were sort of saying, well, what did you decide you need to do? Was it framed as oh gosh, behaviour's all over the shop, or was it framed as aspirations all over the shop at the moment?
It was, I suppose it's a little bit of both, because one of the big parts of the Willows Way was, okay, behaviour's all over the shop, but actually behaviour's all over the shop in quite a lot of schools. So if you,
especially now, actually.
Yeah. So but in so much as well as behaviour policies in a lot of schools are all over the shop. So every school's got a behaviour policy, but the way individual teachers interpret that policy can be very, very different. So, some schools that you visit, you can go from classroom to classroom, or friends have said, classroom to classroom, and the children don't know from 1 minute to the next what the rules actually are. So very early on, we were like, every single teacher in this school is going to know what the rules actually are. They're going to be simple. So it's not, C1, C2. I don't know what they are, but it's never going to be all of that. Or you're allowed a yellow card, you're allowed a red card, you're allowed to disrupt a lesson 4 times, and then you'll be sent out. It's going to be very simple. These are the rules. Everyone is in every single room is sticking to these rules, very routinized. And if you so the children know where they are, we know where they are, teachers know where they are, and that's why newly qualified teachers in particular like it. People on PGCE like it because it's very straightforward. There's, this kind of no grey area. And we were like, okay, and then once everyone knows exactly what they're doing, then we can work on the aspirations. And this is why I'm always building in the why. So I'm a great fan of starting any presentation as well with the why we're doing it. So to the children, to the parents, it was always, we're doing this because we expect the best, and we know your child can be better,
And I'm curious to know, in those early days when you were making probably quite visibly different changes to the learning environment, to the school, what was the response of the kids, the parents and staff, who for some, I'm sure this must have been quite maybe philosophically challenging?
Yeah, definitely. So for the staff, first of all, I suppose we did have staff that had worked there a long time, or we had staff that had come into teaching because they wanted to kind of rescue the world, but maybe in this compassionate way that I was talking about earlier. And it's actually took time for us to convince them, no, this isn't what these children need. What these children need is routines, and children actually really respond to routines, and they like routines, and they became the first ones to pull us up on, oh no, sorry, you're wrong, you're not putting the Willows Way in incorrectly. So so it took a bit of while to convince staff, but actually within the first few weeks when they could see it working, I had people knocking my office door going, okay, you were right. We get it. So that was good. And then with the pupils themselves, it was a bit of eye rolling, obviously. And it's like, oh, what are they doing now? Because I suppose they didn't expect us to stick to something. But again, after maybe a term then of actually sticking to it, they could look around, and our pupil surveys, our staff survey, our pupil surveys were showing that they could learn better in their class, that they could concentrate better, that they found it, even though they don't like to say it in front of their friends, their individual comments were learning a lot more. Parents were quite hard to convince, actually, out of everybody.
Wow.
Because obviously along with it, and I can go into it later, but along with it came quite strict uniform policy, and we want you to be smart on the outside. It means you're smart on the inside. All part of the raising aspirations. What you do if you go for a job interview, what should you wear, how should you react, how should you speak? And parents were, why are they doing this? And I would say it took a few years, actually, not even just a term or a couple of weeks. It took a few years to get the parents to think, actually, the children are starting to behave a bit better, and I can see them around the community a bit better. And then for the people in the streets and the neighbours of the community to say, we had quite a lot of phone calls from bus drivers saying, what's happened at Willows? The kids are really nice, that kind of thing. So It's taken a few years, but it's starting to spread.
So version 1 of the Willows Way then, when you did this sort of big bang kind of thing, you said that the rules were sort of very consistent, but simple.
Yeah.
So what did it actually look like then in Willows? What kind of things did you put in place on sort of day 1 of the Willows Way in terms of concrete things that somebody who came in would have seen? So
day 1, and obviously it's adapted over time. So when we first brought it in, we sort of copied quite a lot of Michaela, their kind of routines and rules. So they do a 1-week boot camp where the children are basically sat down, and it's quite didactic. It's kind of like, right, this is what you're going to do, this is why we do it, and it's drilled and drilled and drilled. So we used to do it like that, and that's how the children kind of got the message. It used to be that they would line up. They still line up. It used to be that they line up in the morning, they line up after break time, they line up after lunchtime, they line up at the end of the day, and the teacher would come and escort them, a bit like primary school, would come and escort them from each line up to their classroom, so the corridors would get better. The only one of those that we've kept is the morning lineup, and I can explain that later if you want why. So we've got the morning lineup, and then we would all come out of our rooms in transition times, and we still all do that, so that it was basically constant vigilance, constant sort of being pernickety, intentionally though, pernickety about things they're doing wrong, walk straight. We tried silent corridors, it didn't work properly, so we that's one of the things that have gone, but we've tried over the years. There's been quite a few iterations of different parts of this. One of the things we did bring in at the same time, actually, which was from a different piece of research, was later start times to school.
Yes.
And
this is interesting. There's a lot of research, isn't there, about how ready they are.
How ready teenage brains are in the morning. So we did start it originally. I think it started at 9:30 originally. But then we were finding that obviously in the autumn term, extracurricular activities and things like that, it was very difficult. People didn't want to walk home in the dark. So that has gradually gone back and back, but we're still a 9 o'clock start, which is still quite late for, schools in Cardiff and generally.
Mm. And what about in classrooms? So I've got a real sense of it in terms of the routines when they're sort of in transition between lessons. How would they look in a sort of more traditional classroom space, and what sort of routines would be visible there in those early days?
So we changed every single classroom to rows, and we said no matter what subject you're teaching, you're having your classroom in rows. And like I said, at first staff were a bit, okay, how's that going to work? Because they'd had years of people saying, do you know what's brilliant? Learning styles and back. And, and do you know what else is brilliant? Everyone working in groups, and, give them a guided discovery.
Oh, gosh.
And what you sort of have to appreciate, at the same time, Curriculum for Wales was coming in, and we were it kind of looked like, we weren't, but it kind of looked like we were going against the grain of what Curriculum for Wales was saying. But we were like, no, we are having rows. And again, teachers realised that actually, okay, this works. What we've got as well is every child, we took away all the sets apart from maths, and every child is always with their form class every day to make it more stable and more routinized. Every form teacher will give the child a number. It's usually the register order. It can sometimes change because of pastoral things and left-handers, and there's all different things we've discovered. But they've got a number, and in every single classroom, the children sit in the same order. And that just keeps it simple and easy. It means when books are collected in, they're collected in the right order. So at the start of a lesson, after they've come out to the corridor, before they go out, the teacher would have placed piles of books on the end of each row. So when the children come in, they collect the books. So you're ready for a short, sharp start. There'll be recap questions on the boards, which are quite knowledge-based and from what they've been learning in the previous lesson. And we've got quite a lot of routines during a lesson. So we will always use, for vocabulary development, we will always say, for example, I say, whatever the word is, you say, and they'll chant it back. If we need to applaud anyone, we've got rules for applauding. So we'll be, okay, on 2, we're going to clap, 1, 2, and the children will clap like that. It's just making everything very routinized and consistent across the school.
And my gut response to this, just as a drama teacher and from a very practical subject, did that extend to all disciplines?
All subjects. So with technology, art, drama, the more practical subjects, we sat with the heads of those departments and we were like, look, this is what we want to do. This is why we're going to do it. But if it falls down in any part of the school, we were like, actually, it's not going to work. So we need you to work with us, maybe think of ways we can do it. So, for example, in drama, instead it was you sat in a circle in your number order.
I wondered about
that. You'll be standing up on 2 and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And then it's quite similar. So you're going to go and work in your group. It's you 1 2 3 4, you 1 2 3 4. You've got 10 minutes, so very directed, but it maximizes the learning time. So we just said as long as you can start the lesson as you start the lesson and end the lesson the same as that we start the lesson. So we've also got, it's called the first 5 minutes and the last 10 minutes, and that's what every teacher does. So it's, like I said, the first 5 minutes will be in the corridor, coming in, the books are given out in a certain way, you're doing your do now. The last 10 minutes is the same, but in reverse. It's kind of a packing away routine. Then you're looking at the board, you're going over your recap questions again, and then you are reminded to put your blazer on, thank your teachers as you go down the corridors, and you're dismissed in a very orderly fashion, row by row, out of the room, just to prevent, any corridor sort of misbehaviour.
And I've been looking into the detail, and I'm curious now. You've got a few acronyms. You've got slant. You've got shapes. Yeah. Tell us about those and why they were important. And I guess what we need to move on to next is, like, you talked about some little tweaks. So maybe we'd love to know what you found along the way. So slant and shapes.
So slant is just a way of getting attention that every single teacher uses. So, in other schools, you might have one teacher that says, right, I'm going to raise my hand. You've all got to raise your hand and be quiet. You might have the teacher next door that says, okay, shh, 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 that type of person. You might have the next one that says, okay, I'm going to cross my arms and everybody's, So we said, right, now every single teacher is going to use slant. So it is taken from Michaela, but also before that, taken from American schools. So it's basically that you sit up straight, that you listen, that you are paying attention to the teacher, that you cross your arms, and then you track the teacher when they're speaking, so you prove that you're listening. So every single teacher in the school will use 3, 2, 1 slant to give them time to get into order. And although, maybe that was some of the criticism from some of the parents saying, what, you're expecting them to be like robots. Well, actually, no, it's every single school has a way of getting order with children. It's just that everyone's doing the same thing. And then shape and steps are just ways of increasing character. So we, as part of the aspirations, it was raising their character profile as well. So we wanted them to speak articulately, to take their hand away from their mouths when they were talking. Lots of ours, children didn't have much confidence when talking to adults, and it's a teenage thing as well. They may look down at their shoes, they may not articulate correctly, they might not say please and thank you, excuse me, sorry. So it was shapes and steps are basically getting them to correct that or repeat it, or to put the thank you on the end of a sentence, just to teach them in later life that is how they would be expected to speak to an adult, or at a job interview.
Okay, just a tiny one before we talk about adaptations. I I remember coming out to observing Willows at this sort of early stage. I really was quite taken by, you know, some of the things that have come through in the Estyn report about how engaged the learners were. But something else I picked up on was the use of booklets, and how structured they were, and how that structure also sort of fed into, I don't know, minimising cognitive load, not minimising challenge, but certain things that were helping with the routines, etc. Is the booklet thing a thing across all subject disciplines, and have you still got it?
Yes, so that was another big part of teaching and learning. So we brought the booklets in. They've gone through quite a few iterations as well, but it was basically, we wanted, even if there was a supply teacher in school, whoever came into that room, we didn't want children to lose any learning time. So we asked every single subject leader to change their curriculum into 6 units, so 1 for every half term. And this was the year before COVID, so it worked out really well because we had them all uploaded. The day COVID was announced and schools were closing, they could still continue. They were all uploaded onto the sort of shared drive. But the booklets are, I suppose, lesson by lesson, but completely up to the subject leader what they want to put in them. You know, it's not prescriptive in so much as we tell them exactly what they've got to do. We did initially say that there had to be a certain amount of reading in the booklets, because obviously that was one of our targets, was to increase reading ages and literacy. And most people have kept that, actually, because it's a good way of calming the children down, but also getting the subject-specific knowledge through to the children. Then we've got some booklet codes. So, for example, just like little reminders, a bit of dual coding in the margin of some of the booklets to remind teachers to do, maybe visualise, to ask the children to visualise if they're reading something so that the comprehension's increased. We've also, over the years then, whilst we've been putting more kind of walkthroughs and teach like a champion techniques in, so we've got little reminders in the margin for teachers to remember to do a turn and talk, or to remember to do a silent solo. But the heads of department have put those in themselves where they think that they'd be the most helpful. We started off with just year 7, 8 and 9, but now obviously the children were used to it, and they really wanted to do that with year 10 and 11 as well. So year 10 and 11 have got booklets as well, although the units might be slightly bigger or smaller depending on the GCSE specs. And that is another aspect I think that student teachers like if they come to our school. They like that the head of department has sort of taken control with, you know, input from everybody else in the department into that planning, and they know basically the lesson. And then we ask our staff, it's not just, you know, pick up the booklet, deliver it. It is, we ask our staff to plan around that then for the class in front of them. So they'll annotate the booklet and they'll say, I'm going to ask these questions to these specific children. They were struggling last time. Or I'm going to add in a video here. They might test it, try it, then use it the year after and put it into the booklet itself. Or they might say, okay, I'm going to make sure that this group of children that were absent last lesson catch up on this page. So it kind of serves as multi-purposes across the school.
Thinking about the sort of creation of these very, very strict routines, and which we know the pupils kind of quite like, don't they, once they're in place, as you said. I suppose there could be a potential pitfall, which is once you've got everybody complying with the routines, and that's a good thing, you know, for behaviour, and everything looks great, and also behaving in a confident way, so hand away from your mouth, you know, look at the person, speak confidently, all of that. You've got all the sort of right look and all the right bits. So you made it very clear that you wanted these pupils to feel that they could mix it with, you know, other bits of Cardiff, and, you know, not feel that they were in any way inferior. So how did you then go on to create the spaces for them to be opinionated, to be creative, to express what they think? Was there any sort of tweak needed to open that back up again, or did those spaces sort of appear by themselves? You know, because I suppose part of aspiration is to actually say, well, you know, this is my way within the Willows way.
Yeah, and I suppose, at the start, like I said, you know, there were people that saying, no, this is a bit robotic, and the children, you know. But actually, if you look at it, and it says in the Estyn report somewhere, it says that they can develop a strong sense of community and personal identity. Yeah. And I think what we've done is given them the confidence and the knowledge. Actually, they needed that first to think, right, now I can use my personal identity, my talents, my, what I've got, I can use that for the good. So running alongside it, we've got a lot of coaching and mentoring going on in the school. We've also got a lot of work with Careers Wales. And valued partners, and they come in and they talk to children about their specific interests, to try and encourage them, motivate them to go on to careers in those kind of fields. There's also a lot of extracurricular clubs. There's also a lot of things that we've never done before. So, for example, debate mates in the city, things like 1 Million Mentors. There's quite a lot of different avenues that their eyes have been sort of opened up to, and giving them those experiences and them feeling confident to walk into that room and compete maybe against other schools, or, has really sort of encouraged their personal identity and their confidence. So I think we needed to do the kind of initial stuff before we could get to this point.
And I'm interested to know, you made that point that you went out to all of those schools. For some stuff you did sort of carbon copy the Michaela way into Willows. And since then, over that sort of 10-year journey, things have probably adapted and changed. I'd love to know sort of what's changed and why.
So sort of some of it is intentional and some of it is kind of because it has evolved. So we used to do, like I said, the 1 week boot camp, and the children were they'd listen to it, but I think they were kind of bored by the end of the week. Now, sort of 7 years on, they know what to expect coming to our school because they've got brothers and sisters that have come, or they've got friends that have come. And also we build it into our transition. So when Susie, our transition lead, goes out to primaries, or they come up to us, even in those days we're getting them to do slant shapes and steps. And they think it's part of secondary school. They think, oh, this is what all secondary schools do. So we found that we didn't need to do the boot camp in as much detail, that they knew what was expected. And obviously we do recap it. We also found with the teachers leading them it back and forth from break to lunch, and at the end of the day, it was a lot for staff to do, in between teaching 5 lessons a day. But we did want to have that kind of routine in the corridors, and that we're all on the left, because our corridors are quite small, so we're all on the left, there's not messing around. So we took away the teachers leading them in and out, but we do still have a lineup like primary school in the morning. So every year group's in a separate venue, they line up, and a script is read out, which is written by our head of character, and that is the same message for the whole school for the week. So it's remember that, I'm very polite to you, you're very polite to me. Remember, we're doing this because we've got high expectations of you. Remember, we're doing this because we want you to succeed well in life. So it's kind of repeating the messages, just so that they know that we're doing it because we care for them, and we make that explicitly clear all the time. And then, so we only have the lineup in the morning now, but our staff still come out into the corridors for every transition. We've kept all the routines with the seat numbers, the booklets. Only this year it's evolved so that we've now got sets again in English and science, but that's because the new GCSEs are coming in, and obviously we've got to adapt things alongside Curriculum for Wales. So it's only been small tweaks really, but it's kind of evolved with the Willows Way, so with the reputation of it sort of becoming more and more successful throughout the community.
I think I'm really sort of getting a sense of the philosophy of this and the impact that it's having on your learners. And of course, they're not always going to be at Willows. You've got high aspirations for where they go to next. Many of them, I'm sure, will go on to university. Not that is, the gold standard. They're going to go into lots of different pathways that you've set them up for. However, when they come to university, they're going to be out of that sort of routinized space. They're going to have a lot more independence. How do you get them ready for that? And do you know of alumni that have gone into those spaces, and have they faced any particular challenges, or actually have you set them up really well?
So that was one of the sort of worries. We were thinking maybe we're being a bit stifling, and then how will they react in college or sixth form? But actually, a lot of them have come back and said to us, do you know what? at the time, perhaps we didn't understand it, but now we completely understand it because people are always saying to us, oh, wow, you're really polite. And we know to go home, and we've sort of disciplined ourselves into, our homework is part of this as well. So we've disciplined ourselves into revising ourselves. We know, to keep our everything organised and in order. We know how to speak to adults. So regarding alumni, sort of two different scales. The other day I was in a sports shop. One of the children that had left only about a year ago came up to me and he was like, Miss, thank you so much. You're the only reason, the school is the only reason I've got this job. And I said, oh, what do you mean? And he said, oh, well, I turned up for my interview in my shoes and my trousers and my, and a shirt. He said, everybody else just came in their sports clothes. He said, and I knew to shake their hand and I knew to say please and thank you. And he said, I wouldn't have done that before. He said, so, that's kind of a small scale. And then children that have been to university, from what I know, that it doesn't seem to have, well, I don't know if harm is the right word, but it doesn't seem to have, made them sort of any, be any far behind their peers. They seem to be a lot more confident. And what it seems to me is, comparing it, because I've been there for such a long time, it seems to me that more of them actually think, I've got the ability to do this, I'm going to do it, rather than if you were maybe before kind of a bit half and half and you might go, well, actually, I'm not going to try. But I think now they've got the kind of the grits to try. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just sort of going all the way back to a little throwaway moment from the top of the episode. You mentioned that by an unfortunate coincidence, I guess, you're kind of transition into this new, the particularly kind of regimented, very let's get the routines in place bit. Your version 1 of the Willows Way coincided with the first sort of exciting publication of all the sort of Curriculum for Wales stuff, which of course had a very different vibe to it, didn't it? Back then, everything was going to be aspirational and all of that. And it's kind of interesting to think that as we've done the last 10 years of the Curriculum for Wales, there's been a growing sense that there's been a bit of a lack of structure in some of that, or a lack of detail in some of that, and some people have got themselves in a bit of a hole. You've said that you didn't feel you were in sort of opposition to the ethos of Curriculum for Wales. How does that all fit together? Is Curriculum for Wales and the Willows Way a good fit, or have you had to kind of ignore some bits?
I suppose on paper you would say it's not a good fit, but actually if you take the bits out of Curriculum for Wales that say, you're doing things that are right for your context, you're doing things that are right for your school, I think morally that's the way you've got to go, and you've got to pull out the bits that you think, right, we know our children need all of this character training as well. We know that knowledge-based curriculum and explicit direct instruction is best for our children. That's how they learn. We know that they have to have that before, and all of that knowledge before they can even think about going on a line of inquiry, or so I think as long as we've had to get that message through to our staff, because obviously sometimes they might be on a training day listening to something completely different. Yeah. So we've had to say, no, actually, this is our belief. This is the research, actually, which is most important. This is what we're building our foundations on. Once the children have got to this level, obviously, then we'll set them off the reins a bit. And because we've got to get them ready for college, you're quite right, and for university, they have to do some independent research. But they need all of this structure in place before they go off. And you can marry that with Curriculum for Wales if you look for it really carefully.
Let's come back to your role working with student teachers and newly qualified teachers. And you've hinted at along the way in this interview so far that NQTs and student teachers find some of your routines quite helpful when they're new, or when they're new to the school. So I'm curious to know, because I know, having worked with them myself, that one of the major anxieties is around behaviour and classroom management. So how do you work with them when they're coming in to get them used to this approach, to get them used to taking on the sort of teacher persona that I would imagine come with this approach? How does that work?
So I always start with an introduction to the school and a chat about why we're doing it and the research that bolsters it. But I always say you're not going to get the feel of it, because they look a bit sort of trepidation. And I think, right, okay, you're not going to get the feel of it till you go into the classroom. And what I find, or what I have found, is that the student teachers sometimes just automatically fall into the position of the pupils, not the teacher. So when the teacher is saying 3, 2, 1 slant, the student teachers, they're back in school themselves.
Slanting away. Yeah.
So I now consciously say to them, okay, when you take your notepad in, you have to put yourself in the role of the teacher and think what that teacher is doing, why that teacher is doing it. And I give them the 2 questions to write at the top of their notepad so they can answer that to keep them on track, because it is quite consistent and routinized, and you just fall into the pattern, So yeah, I think that they observe a lot of lessons now, obviously with the format of the program as well, before they go in. I make sure they see a mixture of practitioners, so they can see everybody's still got their own personality, but they can see that across the school, this is how you do it. I mean, we still have, that thing with student teachers where they still want to be liked and they want to be everyone's friend and they want to be the best teacher in the whole world. And I have to say, actually, people are going to respect you and have, more kind of, are going to listen to what you're saying if you do exactly what we are doing. And it does take a little while, a couple of weeks, and they say, oh, okay, I sent my first person to the provision today. They gave them their 1 warning, then they were out. And they're like, I can see why, because the other 29 then were perfect and they listened. And that's kind of getting the message to them that you've got to kind of sometimes, every now and then, you have to send somebody out so the rest can behave,
Yeah, and going in tandem with this is, in my own mind, that, you have got teachers who've been at Willows for a long time, who maybe they're at the beginning and have seen this through, or maybe who joined when the Willows Way began. And, has this increased your staff retention rate? And has it had an impact that was unexpected on staff's feelings about wellbeing and workload?
Yeah, so we've always had quite good staff retention, but this, over the last 7 years, it has been really, really good, So I think there are some statistics somewhere that say that is one of the best schools for staff retention. And yes, there's a lot of people that are kind of a bit, I'm apprehensive to apply for other jobs now, because I know that people might not have it as strict in their school, or they might not have it as sort of rigid. So our staff surveys as well, we do a staff wellbeing survey every half term, and the graphs are all, in the 90s now. So people seem to be very happy in the workplace, very happy in their job. And, obviously, same as any workplace, you do get every now and then a bit of a ripple or something that is sort of winds people up. But I think that they know, from starting this off, and the way the school has changed, they know that we've got the best intentions for them and the pupils at heart. So I think that they're more open now. They'll come and tell us, and they'll say, well, this is why we think this and that, and why have you done it? And they're more inclined to listen to what we say. So,
and are you getting a sense of the nitty gritty details of why they feel better? I'm just wondering about things like, booklets. Yes, you've got this degree of autonomy, which I think is really important, an agency for the teacher to adapt it for the children in front of them, to bring in, something that comes across in the Estyn report is you've got some subject experts who are so passionate about this subject. But that booklet also sort of takes a bit of workload pressure away, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because
So initially, obviously, it created a bit of pressure, because they had to start making the booklets for Key Stage 3. But we did, like I said, stagger it. So it wasn't just make all of these booklets all at once. So we staggered it so that they could kind of build up and build on it. And now it is only the head of department, really, that has to go through the booklet, tweak the booklet at the end of a half term, ready for the next year. So from your average teacher in the classroom, I suppose it has taken away quite a lot of the pressure of trying to think of things or find resources. Obviously, they are welcome to add things in if they want to, but a lot of that sort of frantic pressure, you know, in schools, maybe the night before or the day of, you're not scrabbling around for photocopying or materials or anything like that, because you know it's all already in the booklet, which is good, because then it gives, like I said, it gives them the time to actually think about the class that's going to be in front of them and how you're going to make that lesson the best possible lesson for those children in front of them, either for individuals or groups that have, you know, maybe missed some work. So in that respect, I think it's raised the profile of teaching and learning in our school, whilst hopefully, I think, making staff wellbeing kind of at the forefront. You know, it's the same with our marking policy, the same with everything we try to do is trying to decrease staff workload and, you know, think of their wellbeing, but also maximise the opportunity for the children.
Thinking about just zooming out a little bit to the bigger picture, you said about Curriculum for Wales there, and I completely agree with you that actually the sort of one of the big headlines of Curriculum for Wales is every school is supposed to get its story straight about who they are, what they need, and then make a curriculum that matches. And I was, because I know how to have fun, I was reading one of the Estyn annual reports yesterday, and they were sort of giving a very strong hint that the schools that were having the kind of best time putting Curriculum for Wales out there were the ones who had first taken the time to really get their story straight about who they were and what they needed. And I suppose the glib answer is always, well, of course we know who we are. We're here, we're in our place, here we are, we're our school. But as you've sort of hinted, in some ways it could almost be a danger that you fall into that, well, you know, we're Willows, we're always going to be Willows, we're, you know. And you've managed to find that balance between really knowing who you are, but also sort of stepping back and going, but we could be, you know, within that we could be that. If you were in a school and you're thinking, have I got my story straight? What would you recommend in terms of sort of top tips for really knowing yourself as a school? Because you obviously do.
I would say it is listening to every single stakeholder. I know that might be a bit of a cheesy answer, but actually listening in the corridors to sometimes even, you know, if the cleaners were speaking, or the parents as they're dropping somebody off at reception, or maybe, you know, some of the neurodiverse learners, or some of the more able and talented learners, you know, just walking around listening to what they are actually saying, even sitting down with them and doing kind of a pupil interview, or what works better actually is, like I said, an individual survey so they can't copy their friends. But actually that will give you an insight, you know, on top of the staff and the parents. It will give you an insight into what your school actually is, and what you might need to do to make it even better.
There's a phrase that my husband often uses, which is listen to the whispers before you hear the screams. And I think you're right. You sort of got to keep your ear to the ground and listen to everybody. And I think it's a really good place to pause this deep discussion. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of school colleagues in South Wales contacting you, maybe even further afield now that this Estyn report has come out. And another congratulations to the whole of your school on, you know, what is a glowing report. Well done. We've got 2 short slots, Kelly, that I'm sure you've had a think about. Would you like to start with something interesting or something to try?
I'll go with something to try, because that's still in education. So something to try is from a book that I've just read called Just Tell Them. So it's about explicit direct instruction, and it's by Zach Groeschel. And we've just done inset on this. So it was all about when you're in a lesson and you're introducing a new word, you don't just ram down the throats the definition of the word. It is much better for children to give them a range of examples of the word in a sentence. So you give them a lot of sentences where that word makes perfect sense. But underneath, you also give them a load of sentences where the word does not make any sense at all. And then you do a quick test to say, right, does it make sense? Does it not make sense in this sentence? And I came across that the other day, and I thought, you know, I probably have done it as an English teacher kind of without putting too much thought into it in a classroom. But actually, if you sat there and thought about that and put that into your planning, it would make a massive difference, because sometimes children just like try to use a nice long new word. but they don't quite grasp the concept. So I think giving them the examples would actually help loads of people. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's a
Nice
really
one.
nice,
Yeah.
tangible,
Yeah.
strategy. I'll have a go at that myself with my
We
student
like
teachers.
that. We also like it when someone brings us something interesting that is not to do with education. So we've got something especially interesting for
This
us.
is the hardest question. So I was thinking of lots of different things I could say for this, but I think the thing that I think is interesting that I do a lot of, and especially since sort of the lockdown and COVID, is yoga videos on YouTube. And especially yoga with Adrian, who sort of I speak to more than my friends, I think. You know, she's sort of every day, sort of in my years. But I think it's brilliant for teachers in particular, because not only is it like good for your well-being and you're stretching after you've been running around all day or sitting doing lots of marking all day. I just think the concepts behind yoga really help you day to day. So, for example, just with some patience and with breathing when you're dealing with difficult situations in school. Sort of being a bit of a warrior as well, and sort of standing up for your point, and, you know, you want to make a difference. So as you're walking around, I thought that would be really good for NQTs to think of themselves as little warriors who are going to make a difference. And then also teaching the things that we teach in the Willows Way. So to be humble, to have gratitude. I think it would develop your character as well. So I'm going to go for yoga with Adrian for that question.
And her dog, Sweet Benji.
Oh, I know.
I know the
I feel part of the
exact.
family.
I know that exact person, and we're both yoga converts, aren't we, Tom?
Yes, indeed. Secret yoga fan.
Yeah, so let's all take a nice cleansing breath now and say a big thank you to you, Kelly, for coming on the podcast today. I'm sure we'll ask you back at some point. We've got your email address. You can run, but you can't hide. You're only 2 miles down the road.
Yes, and so from Warriors 1, 2 and 3, it's bye for now, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. You've been listening to Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma O'Dooher and Tom Breeze. The special guest this episode was Kelly Bubbins from Willows High School in Cardiff, and thanks to Kelly for coming in today. Podcast artwork is by Beth Blandford and the music is by Cameron Stewart. Technical support from Peter Lamben, and the studio manager is Adrian Rapps. We'll be back in a fortnight with something else interesting. Until then, take care and enjoy teaching.